Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to another of our Webinar Wednesdays, number 47 since the pandemic started, which only can mean one thing. We're coming up on a year. So got a great webinar today for you. Special guest Deanna Blaise will be with us momentarily. I'm Kelly Bearden. I'm the director of the CSU Bakersfield Small Business Development Center. And got a lot to talk about today. A lot going on with the relief programs, a lot going on, and still a lot of questions yet to be answered, but we'll get through what we can today. And we'll start with, of course, that a little bit about the SBDC being part of America's SBDC across the country, 50 states, six other properties of the United States, you might say. In California, we have 5 lead centers. We're part of the Central California region. It's mostly that region right there, the central swath of California, from the Pacific Ocean, the state of Nevada, down to the bottom of Kern County to the top of Mono County. In there, you'll find 6 service centers in Bakersfield, Clovis, Merced, Modesto, also in Salinas and in San Luis Obispo. So if you have any questions about any of the things we discussed today, reach out to your local SBDC. After the webinar, you can always shoot me an email. I'll try to answer your questions as well. We'll allot a lot of time today for questions and answers because we know you have them and we have the expert to answer them today. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, first, we're going to talk about a couple of programs coming up in the local area. One is selling to corporations. And it's a procurement regional webinar. It's a number of series, 4 in a series, lasts for a couple of weeks. So you can actually register for that. And there's some unique selling opportunities, not only to the government, not only to the federal government, state government, or local government, but also to corporations who actually adhere to a lot of the same rules and regulations. And so how do you get in as a small business and actually sell to these larger entities in their process? Another thing I wanted to mention is that the Black History Parade this month, celebrate Black History Month. The parade will actually go virtual this month and be on the 27th of February. You can get applications into the Kern County Black Chamber of Commerce. A 3-minute video and a $10 entry fee will get you in. So individuals, churches, businesses, etc., contact the Black Chamber of Commerce, the Kern County Black Chamber of Commerce, for more information. We'll put that in the chat and also include it in our resources that we put out. So that brings us to February the 3rd already, February 3rd, 2021. We did get a little bit of guidance this last week, and it was pertaining a lot to what was from the CARES Act, left over from the CARES Act, and SBA issued a non-taxable status for SBA loans that the SBA paid during the year 2020. So if you had a 504 loan, a SBA 7A loan, or an SBA micro loan or another SBA product last year, the SBA, realizing that it's a lot easier to make your payments during this pandemic that you didn't create, rather than for them to start dealing with the mess afterwards, and hopefully everything gets up and going and everybody gets back online. But generally with the IRS, with forgivable debt is considered a taxable item. And it really took the legislation of the last stimulus program, the Economic Aid Act, in order to set that straight, where SBA said that they are not going to be issuing 1099s for that amount to be included in income for those people who got it. Okay, we're going to talk a lot about the PPP today, and also both for first timers in the second draw, and we'll do that with our special guest in just a little bit. We'll get through a number of these other programs and then we'll bring Deanna on. So we're going to talk a little bit today about the employment tax credit, which we have not received our firm information on. We'll get into the California Relief Grant and what we learned about the first round that now has everybody who applied, all 340,000 of you should have received an email by now saying that you either received, were accepted for the grant, that you are being waitlisted into this second round that started yesterday, or that your application was incomplete and you need to do further to be considered for this second round of $237.5 million going to small businesses 25 employees or under throughout the state. We heard last week from the city of Bakersfield. I don't think this is out officially yet, so shame on me, but they will have two programs out. One of them will be a micro lending program. These will probably be announced in the next week, maybe even sooner. The first program is a micro program for businesses located in the city of Bakersfield. I believe the maximum amount of the micro grant for those very small businesses are going to be about $5,000 on a first come, first served basis. And we're also looking at, so they're only looking at having a little less than 100,000 in that. So probably less than 20 total grants, maybe around 20 if they're smaller than 5,000. So not a lot there, but they are going to also have a forgivable program that's going to have a few $1,000,000 in it that's going to go to $50,000. Perhaps those of you that have contacted me that you're at 23.99%, and you needed a 25% reduction in order to qualify for the second round. And trust me, I've heard from a lot of you, they're in that 20 to 24.99% and just missed out. So maybe this is something that hopefully, if you're in the city of Bakersfield, that will be able to assist you. Well, we got new stimulus talk. Boy, you know, it took a lot of talk to get the last deal done. I think we talked on this program for about 5 months and finally got something at the end of December. Last night, there was a little bit of a meeting between the president and 10 Republican senators, and they started hashing out what the next stimulus bill might look like. The president has proposed a $1.9 trillion package. We talked a little bit about this the last 2 weeks. We won't get into details today, but $1.9 trillion, and the Republicans have countered with a $618 billion program. So a lot of direct payments to individuals, unemployment. The president's version has more money for the vaccine, basically all of those items. What you want to know about is what's in there for small business, and for small business in both of them is a component of about $50 million, which I haven't heard identified yet. We did hear a little news today. I attended the online version of the SBA nominee, Isabel Guzman, who testified before the Senate panel, the Senate Small Business and Entrepreneurship panel this morning in DC. And I find that those are really helpful for me getting information mainly on what individual senators really want and really their direction and focus moving forward. So if we do see more of these stimulus plans, we're actually seeing what each individual focus is from the senators that come out of this important committee that shape a lot of the small business legislation. Isabel Guzman, I met Isabel back during the Ridgecrest earthquake in Ridgecrest. We had a meeting with Tim Smith of the Ridgecrest Chamber of Commerce and corresponded with her in her role as the California Small Business Advocate, and also the head of small business programs for the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. Isabel is an excellent choice, as most of the senators said today, and her nomination, at least from what I witnessed today, looks assured. So let me be the first to congratulate Isabel in advance. So along with that, we'll take your questions today, and we'll jump into a very limited poll, as we really don't have the time and effort to go through multiple poll questions. But really what I wanted to get today, now that we're a month into 2021, I want to get your best estimate for your sales revenue for 2021. And I want to compare that to 2019. So what do you think your revenue is going to be for 2021? Is it going to be the same as 2019? Maybe a little better, substantially better? Is it going to be a little worse, or is it going to be substantially worse than 2019? So you're voting. We've got about 30% of you in right now. Vote, I'd say vote often and vote early, but you can only vote once. So get in. It's the best estimate for sales revenue, same as 19, a little better, a little substantially better, a little worse, or substantially worse. Okay, great. We have about 65% of you that now have voted. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut off the poll and share the results with you. And substantially worse, 37% of you, and a little worse, 24% of you. So roughly 6 in 10 are not going to be able to get back to those 2019 numbers. And that's totally understandable with the pandemic lingering on and it being a while before, even though we're trending in the right direction, before many of you get your businesses back to where they want to be. So 37% substantially worse, 24 a little worse, a little better, 15%, and 13% substantially better, along with about 11% of you about the same as 2019. Okay, well, thank you. Maybe we'll do another poll in another few months with that same question and see how things are going and trending, and hopefully these numbers improve a little bit. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to give you a kind of a quick status and maybe what you need to do as far as some of these main programs that are going right now. And these are programs that came out of the Economic Aid Act. We call them our big aid here. And just to let you know, the second draw PPP is open. And we'll get into a great discussion on that later today for those firms that can qualify for the 25% exclusion or 25% reduction. PPP first round is open. Theaters and venues, our shuttered venues, Save Our Stages, $15 billion in grants, will be opening soon. And I think I have a slide for this, but I'm going to just jump into it because maybe twice is better than once or none's. None's, I like that. Not at all. So with this particular program, the shuttered venues, and I know there's several of you out there that are waiting, and we went over quite a bit of the program rules last week. During testimony today, nominee Guzman mentioned that one of her priorities will be when she gets in, if she is actually the nominee and to be the SBA administrator, will be to get the final rules and guidance out for this shuttered venue program. So this should open soon. The employer retention tax credit was amended and then extended into 2021. We are expecting that to open soon. That is requiring guidance from the Internal Revenue Service. And so once that has happened, that'll be the status of that program. The EIDL loan information, EIDL loan program is open. The new EIDL grant, which has kind of taken over for the older advance that was given out last year, and then subsequently forgiven as part of your original PPP if you received both the old EIDL advance and PPP. That is in the hands of SBA, and SBA, that's something you need to check your email. If you have an EIDL advance that is between $1,000 and $9,000, and you think you live in an area that could be 20% lower household income in the state of California, then you should be getting an email from the actual SBA. Now, look carefully. We talked about this before. Make sure it's sba.gov, where your email is coming from, and not sba.go or .governor or whatever. But sba.gov is what you're looking for. PPP forgiveness. The new form is expected to be out soon, the one-page form. So we're encouraging people to perhaps wait unless you have another reason not to, wait for the one-page simplification form that is open for those with 150,000 and less in their original PPP. The tax deductibility that is allowed for PPP funds, you can actually now do on your taxes. And I believe the PUA unemployment is open. So that is the status of those. Any action that you need to do is for the PPP, you need to see a lender that's doing the PPP, and that either being the lender did your PPP or original one, or if you're in the first draw, a lender that is actually participating in the program this round. Stay tuned for theaters and venues, and stay tuned also for the employee retention tax credit. Those have been opened. SBA again will do the action. All you need to do is check your spam and your email, your clutter, or wherever your email could go from a bulk email from SBA. Form should be out soon. And then also the other two items that we just talked about a little bit. Okay, so the one thing, the tax consequences are something, the tax aspects of what we're looking at are something that we wanted to kind of go over since some of that changed this week. Please recall that the PPP forgivable loan is not revenue, and the expenses are now tax deductible. That is with the US government. It is not so with the state of California. And again, remember that typically forgiven debt is something that is taxable by the IRS. So we're not really sure if you received any CARES Act funding for other programs. So if you received a CARES Act Kern Recovers program, or actually BCARES, or in some other little local community, or even the grant that's being issued is still going to be interesting as well. Those, there's actually been no guidance on that particular as to what would change the existing IRS funding of that. So if it's me and I received one of those, right now I would consider that to be taxable. But do check with your tax advisor and see what they're saying. So then also, you know, you're going to have taxability issues for unemployment if you're a sole proprietor or independent contractor who for the first time in history as being self-employed received unemployment insurance in the state of California. So there is taxability there. It will be taxable income. The expanded employee tax credit, retention credit, will be available for those that have the 20% drop in revenue. And also, no longer, as we mentioned, will be the need to actually pay back as part of your PPP, your original PPP, that EIDL advance. So on to the California Relief Act, and the California Relief Act actually is now in round 2. It opened yesterday. If you applied for round 1 and you were given an email saying you were waitlisted, please do not actually apply again. Applying again will kind of generate either a fraud or a condition that kicks out your application or puts it on hold and will not allow you. So if you have multiple applications in there for the same business, do contact Lindustry. Their phone number is in the email. They've hired additional people and they have been getting and handling a lot of our client calls. So if you have any issues, contact them. If you want to apply for the first time for round 2, we encourage you to go to our CSUB SBDC YouTube page or YouTube channel. And we did have on December 30th, when the first round opened, a short little 30-minute guide for eligibility and kind of how to do the application process. So please refer to that if you need either eligibility or more information on the program. Recall the grants ranged from $5,000 to $25,000 and up to revenue of $2.5 million. Totally, there was $237.5 million that was funded in round 1. Most of those individuals would have got an email by now saying that they were, I don't think it actually said in looking at a couple of these that they were approved. It said that, or maybe it said they were approved waiting submission of other paperwork. So there is a requirement to actually upload additional paperwork that was not included in your application. So if you've been tentatively approved, final approval will come after that has been submitted and then approved. Many of you, or actually the majority of you that I've talked to, have been waitlisted, which means that you were not selected in round 1, but you have been placed into consideration for round 2. Nothing else needs to be done, no other filing. You just need to make sure that you had a complete application that was submitted. A few of you actually were either declined or you had, because you had an ineligible business or some other reason that you were ineligible, or you had an incomplete application. And again, there were over 340,000 applications received. So an extraordinarily popular program, and the number of applications has lessened your opportunity and the chances that you will be selected. And again, one other thing in the governor's budget that I believe would start on July 1 is another $500 million round for this. So we're encouraging people to get in at round 2, because it's possible if there's so many applications that they might not open it up again for applications if that were to become available in a few months. I mean, we have not heard that, haven't heard one way or another, but it very well could be. A number of the programs that we're going to talk about, including PPP Shuttered Venue, the EIDL grant, and the employer tax credit, all have a drop in revenues from 2019 to your 2020 pandemic levels. So they all vary. For example, the EIDL grant is not a quarterly drop. The 30% is for an 8-week period. So it is for 2 months rather than a quarter, which is typically 3 months. So various rules and regulations, and really one of the first things you can do is go in and you can calculate that, and calculate it twice, because as I admitted last week, my first time I calculated the 25% drop, I underestimated it. So check your calculations. It's a great program here. Once it's going to get opened, is that Shuttered venue operator grant. And really, the Senate panel today had a lot of really great things to say. They're excited about it, and they're anticipating. So the Senate Small Business Committee, Entrepreneurship Committee, those senators are really excited about this happening, and happening relatively soon. So hopefully we'll have information and have some final rules and application process. We do have some of it. And as I mentioned, the latest was this morning, mentioned that this was going to be a high priority if she is confirmed to the SBA administrator position. Briefly, we covered this a little bit last week, but it really kind of shows the priority that's going to be kind of happening in this, and it's going to be those that suffered the greatest revenue loss are going to be given the first priority, and they're going to be given the earliest opportunity to apply. There's also going to be some that's going to be held back for those that are smaller firms. So truly small venues that are 50 and under are going to have a separate pool of money that they can apply to. So it's the hopes that along with the PPP, I think this second round, along with shuttered venues, is to make sure it gets out to the smallest of businesses that have been impacted by the pandemic. So here's an example. If for those that could get in on the first 14 days of it, if you did 200,000 in 2019 and only 20,000 last year, and experienced a 90% drop, your total revenue would be 10% of that, and also the number of employees factored in. We talked a little bit about during the intro of the targeted EIDL advance, which is now the targeted EIDL grant. And again, it's those 1 to 9,000 initially. So I think we talked enough about that in the intro. Again, it's going to be those, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to provide, if you are in that low income community area, and if you want to look for yourself to see if you are in that area, it is defined by section 45D, subchapter E of the Internal Revenue Code. And when I took a glance at it, it was 80% of household income in that particular census tract that you are in compared to the statewide average. So you're going to need to demonstrate that there was a 30% drop in revenue. They're going to request that in the email, if you are, say you got a $4,000 EIDL advance last year, to get the other $6,000 that you could get in this program, you're going to have to fill out a few things. One of those is going to have to be a 4506T, which is very common with all SBA lending. And what that does is gives the SBA permission to access your tax returns from the IRS. And, you know, a business that has been around, that has actually been around for 3 years, most likely has filed a couple of years of tax returns. And that is designed to try to cut down on some of the fraud that they encountered earlier from businesses that just popped up and said they were in business. The other thing, to demonstrate and be able to show that 30% reduction, you're going to need to provide month-to-month revenues for each of the months in 2019 and 2020. So that is something, and I imagine the same rules, if you weren't open all of 2019, that apply to the PPP will apply there. So that's enough on your targeted advance. Jumping through things, the employer retention tax credit. Remember, this is now open to employees that receive the PPP. This program has changed substantially. We didn't talk about this, but maybe once or twice the entire last year, because so many of you had the PPP, and also so many of you weren't going to be able to qualify because of the 50% reduction in a quarter as compared to 2019. So a lot of the changes that have happened, we'll talk into more about this when we get final rules. Really, the hot thing we want to talk about today is going to be the PPP program, and I'm going to bring in our special guest today. Our special guest is Deanna Blaise, and she's Vice President of Member Services for Valley Strong Credit Union, a regional credit union based in Bakersfield, serving the San Joaquin Valley, or much of it. Ms. Blaise is she's a runner, a graduate, alumna of the California State University, Bakersfield, also baking school, and the very popular Pacific Coast Baking School, I find out. So as I mentioned, it started in Kern County back in 1938 and has expanded northward throughout the San Joaquin Valley, 150,000 members and so forth. You can read the rest. Deanna, thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you with us. And thanks for being here.
Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, thank you for having me.
So what we'll do now is we'll just kind of go through some of the general provisions, and just to remind, and these are slides that we've talked about a little bit the last 2 or 3 weeks since we've really learned about what the PPP second draw, and for those that didn't get the first PPP, the first draw looked like. And some of the things that jump out again is it's 300 and fewer employees. You can get 2.5 times compared like you could from the original PPP, 3.5 times for those that are in the wonderful NAICE code 72XXXX. And then another additional expenses that you see. Anything jump out at that page that you're running into and you're seeing a lot of right now, Deanna? Or maybe one of the things that you might know more about than I do, like the $15 billion set aside for lending for smaller lenders in underserved markets.
Sure. Yeah, I know definitely lenders have been assisting always in those underserved markets. They had an opportunity to do so a little bit ahead of some of the larger institutions. Those folks were able to start on January 13th and have been working those applications through. And then as of January 19th, all other lenders had the ability then to begin accepting applications for the program. And one of the feedbacks we've been getting as a lender that we weren't able to start accepting applications until the 19th to submit to SBA. There's some concern about possibly, a backlog or being able to get to applications. So we've had a wonderful response from that, but all organizations that are running the program for the business community are seeing, all different levels of applications coming through. So the SBA did see a number of applications come through approval, for the smaller institutions. So it was really great to see those institutions have a head start. One of the things I can say about the second round that as a lender that we're starting to see that maybe could help some of the businesses out there who are applying is that there has been some confusion depending upon what the lender that you're going to or the platform maybe that they're using. If some institutions are using technology providers to help administer the program, there may be some confusion around what loan number to use for your first draw loan. What we're seeing a lot of is people using their lender loan number versus the SBA loan number. And in the early stages, what we're seeing is it's causing us to not receive a good approval from the SBA as some of the data is not matching. So just a little food for thought out there for the businesses who've applied and maybe are stuck initially in the system. And maybe you're being asked to, check some of your data that you've input, double check those figures. And then also, Kelly, what we're seeing around the reduction of the 25% of sales and knowing when to supply the documentation. As you know, the guidance out there stated for loans under 150,000, applicants could wait to provide the supporting documentation at the time of forgiveness. So we've been receiving a lot of questions about that. Should I apply, submit my information now for review? If businesses want to, make sure that they have the proper documentation to support the revenue reduction, making sure that they're eligible, by all means, I encourage people to do that. But if you're well aware of the experience you received and you're a little bit strained on the reporting for loans under 150, you don't have to submit that until forgiveness. So I did want to, kind of put that out there for people who are maybe just not sure about that small piece of it on the questions we've received so far.
Great. Hey, one question before we leave this slide and move on that I thought of is, what is the actual, just kind of the rough percentage that you're seeing about those that are applying for PPP second draw compared to those that are applying for the first time? I always think everything's 80-20. So,
we thought, Kelly, that it was going to be that. Interesting that you asked. I just ran some figures last night on the applications we've received so far, because we're curious as well. So far, we've just received almost 500 applications since turning on our system. And it's really almost 50-50 exactly as far as the number of applications we've taken, just slightly lower on the first draw versus second draw. So we're about 48% on the first draw, 52 on the second draw. So that was surprising to us.
Yeah, I would have thought it would have been higher on the second draw also.
Yeah, we thought so as well. But I guess some of the feedback we are getting from applicants is that, they thought they could hold out a little bit longer and didn't know that the pandemic was going to last this long as far as having that drastic of an impact. I don't think any of us thought it would last this long. And so now they're really in dire need and are definitely signing up. I've encouraged all businesses, reach out for help. The help is here. There's so many resources available for businesses. And like Kelly, you've talked about all the grants. There's help out there. So don't be afraid to seek out what assistance is available.
Another thing, when I was on the Senate hearing earlier today, I was trying to get some information because I haven't seen anything on, I did hear a couple of senators talk about that, what the numbers that they are seeing, which I don't think have been published yet.
Right.
Are suggesting a lower loan size for the PPP. Now, the first one, I know Deanna, but the first one started off sky high at around 240,000, and then all of a sudden dropped down to, by the time the program ended, and it started accessing smaller and smaller borrowers down to about 100,000.
Yes.
Are you getting any sense if it's around that 100,000 again? I think the senators today noticed that it was smaller.
Yeah, for us, it's actually a bit smaller, Kelly. I think for our institution, when you look at, us as a credit union, we're newer to the business environment just the last couple of years. Our member base is mostly consumer. So we do see a lot of sole proprietor business just within our business here, but our average loan size has been somewhere between, we're still looking at the numbers, but $75,000 to $80,000 is what our average is so far. So it's a little bit smaller.
Interesting. Well, let's go on to the next slide, which I can never remember what it is, but Oh, it's the costs that are now eligible, because with PPP, and the nice thing about this rule is that it allowed for other expenditures. When the original PPP came out, it was 75% payroll. The first week in June, that got fixed with some legislation down to 60% for payroll. Now
Mhm.
it's still 60%, but it looks like that there's a number of other expenditures that can be used. And also, those that had the original PPP can now use these expenditures and go back retroactively and use those for forgiveness for their first one. So are you seeing much with the individuals that you talk to or you hear about the added benefit of these other expenditures?
I think initially with the guidance that's now coming out, it's really trying to understand what they can and can't include. The biggest one that we're seeing is about covering the operating expenditures that are associated with whether providing additional barriers, let's say in a business, or the additional masks and things of that nature that they've had to accommodate those operating expenses, and trying to understand. um, the other one that comes up also is their insurance expense, and potentially of the increases of that, and trying to understand what is going to be eligible as far as covering what you have on the screen here in the operating expenditures. That's the biggest area. Also trying to decipher that. We do encourage the applicants to work closely with their CPA in reviewing the guidance as well, just to make sure they understand how they're reporting those figures and separating out potentially, what did go towards those other elements. So it's a little bit more clear for the SBA when they do go for forgiveness.
Yeah, that third bullet is the one I'm having the biggest problem with. And I
Yeah,
do expect guidance on that anytime soon, because it seems like the congressional intent there, and I always like to kind of go back to intent of what Congress is trying to think anyway,
yeah,
um, is that so many businesses had to go online and they had to shut down and they had to go curbside. And
right.
it was like the expenses for delivery and the added cloud expenditures and things for doing that is what it seems
Yes,
like it is. But it's a little bit too vague right now for a lot of people.
agreed. And
And
that
I would think
that's
really with lenders, it's a little too vague right now.
yes, as some of the guidance that gets put out there, it puts all of us, I think, sometimes in a difficult situation of trying to interpret the guidance. How do they decipher, like you're saying, the before, especially on the software side? You had software before this happened to run your elements, like you're saying. Possibly maybe looking at your point in time when you maybe had an adjustment to maybe some of your software contracts, where maybe you had to bolt on, you know, additional, let's say Zoom, for example. You bring on a new Zoom contract, and I'm going down the path of, can you describe in simple ways as possible, kind of your before and after scenario, and what was added, that maybe it's making it easier to understand the records that when you're supplying those to SBA. I can just give an example on, especially going through the forgiveness. The SBA is, doing random samplings, different applications that they select for additional supporting documents. So the more clear I think that the backup support is to describe for the SBA how you calculated those figures and then attaching your supporting documents, that's when you're going to be in the best position for your support. So it's when things just kind of get thrown at the wall. Here's all my stuff with no real explanation at how you arrived at where the money, was spent. That's when I think, more of the questionings come in. So the cleaner your records, the cleaner your explanation, the more success we're having.
I think that's great advice, especially on the documentation part, because SBA has said that the rules of the program might change, but it's when you make the decision what the rules are at that time.
Right. Right.
Especially with the interim final rules, they can come out and say, and when they provide the guidance, you might say, oh boy, I really screwed up there. But if you can document on why you made that decision and you made
Right.
it at the time when this was the information, then you
Yes.
can win that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know that's been a challenge for a lot of people, and I couldn't agree with that statement more.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about the PPP second draw. And I keep promising our fine clients and people in the Eastern Sierra and Inyo and Mono that have a lot of seasonal employers, how these rules would fit. I haven't quite got there yet, but next week for sure. You're
Okay.
probably not seeing too many seasonal employers in the
No,
San Joaquin Valley.
you know what, Kelly, we aren't, even on the, I would say call it even the first round or the reopening of the first round. We really, I can count on one hand the number of seasonal applicants that we did see. This really just wasn't and I'm not sure why that is, or if just maybe in our markets, do we just not have that many? I was surprised at not seeing a few more seasonal employees or businesses that, and I don't know if that was really just due to the timing of the program when it came out. Maybe perhaps, around the holidays or where you see companies come in, or I would say more towards the fall or things of that nature, but that just has not been real prevalent in our applicants.
Yeah, you'd think there'd be more maybe ag-related businesses that
Yes,
could be considered seasonal.
yes.
Okay, so one of the things we've been talking about, a little too far there, got a little trigger happy. So we've been talking about the differences a little bit about, I call them the must-haves for a PPP second draw. And
Okay,
there's some smaller hidden things in there, like you had to spend all of your first draw funds to be
right.
eligible for the second draw, which I won't go into fundamentally I have a problem with, but I do, obviously, because those are the people that were impacted the most if they couldn't spend their money.
Right.
So that makes no sense to me. But then there's also the ones on the new eligible expenses. We talked a little bit about that. So what do you see on that? And also you had to, not only that, you had to spend all your first draw funds, but you had to spend them appropriately, 60% on payroll and then the other 40% in the other
Correct.
expenditures. So you could have paid a supplier $500 out of $150,000 PPP and theoretically be ineligible for this program.
Correct. Now, one of the other things I can tell you too that we're seeing around just the forgiveness application piece of it, there's some confusion around when they can apply, right? You're talking about using all the funds. So when they are applying, they're saying, do I have to have had forgiveness already completed? Or is it just the funding? So the guidance is telling us that they do not have to have had their loan forgiven. The other caveat is they can apply at that time if it hasn't been forgiven, or if they haven't applied, they do have to prove that they have spent the money already. The other piece of it is if their application has been submitted for forgiveness, and let's say it's under review by the SBA for whatever reason, the SBA is holding, if they've already submitted a second draw application, the SBA will not provide an approval until the forgiveness application has been settled with whatever's under review. And under review means not that they're just validating that your application is acceptable, but if they're asking, questioning, provide additional supporting documentation, that's what they're meaning by under like formal review. An actual letter has come through stating to the lender, please provide supporting documents. This particular application goes to an under review status, which then could cause some confusion with the applicants out there and understanding what these different terminologies mean. So if we go back to that, you don't have to have applied for forgiveness. If you did apply for forgiveness but haven't been fully forgiven, you're still eligible there to apply for the second draw loan. You have to prove that you spent all the money before it can be funded. So that's the key there. The lenders are looking for, just that support that the money was used. If we get an approval by the SBA, then the loan can be funded.
Great. So before we leave this page, maybe if you could share with us a little bit of what you've experienced on the forgiveness side of things that you've already been through.
Okay.
So, and with that, I think this is a tough question because I think you need more guidance on this. But one question that comes up regularly, and I haven't looked in the Q&A box, and please submit your
Okay.
questions and answer questions because we are getting to that section.
Okay.
But one of them that keeps coming up is I already was granted forgiveness and I repaid my EIDL advance. Am I going to
Yes,
get that back now?
that is the
I think
$300
we need
million
more guidance.
question.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, or I guess I shouldn't say unfortunately, we know that the guidance came out, after December 27th, that was turned over, meaning that the EIDL advance up to the 10,000 would be forgivable. So for those applicants that applied for forgiveness early on and the SBA withheld that because of just basically a timing issue, we did have, I can count on one hand the number of applications that did receive forgiveness, that EIDL money was held out. What we've done for our applicants as a lender is just push out that payment due date to allow the SBA to get a handle on how they're actually, from an accounting perspective, return those monies back to the lender to give back then to the borrower and credit their loan, getting it down to zero for those that are eligible for full forgiveness. So we too are waiting for the guidance to come out. I know that's a little frustrating for applicants who are sitting in limbo, irregardless of what lender you're at. Just know that all of us are in the same boat as far as how to get those funds back. So I have not seen anything as of today come through those applicants. We've been waiting to see those funds come back. I'm curious too, Kelly, because with the SBA on their side, I'm not sure if it's like, okay, they've closed that application out, and they move on to the next. I don't know what their process will be to circle back for those that were in that category early on before the 27th of December.
Do you have any other general trends that you saw when you were going through the forgiveness? Was there any common mistakes that were coming up with borrowers applying?
No,
Anything jump out at you?
nothing really that has jumped out. A lot of people are asking, they want a timeline. How fast is the SBA responding to the forgiveness application? And initially, when we first got started, I was trying to watch, okay, we've submitted on this day. How many days is it taking for them to respond? There really has not been anything I can button down. We've seen some responses come back within 7 to 10 days, seeing the applicant's application fully forgiven. We've also seen some take the full 90 days and almost on even the last day come back with SBA requesting additional documentation. Then that kind of stops the clock, puts it back into the lender's review to provide maybe the additional documentation they are asking for, and then the clock continues. So yeah, I wish I had a better answer for applicants out there, but there's no consistent delivery of expectation on timeline. They're taking either a few days to the full 90 days and then a little bit beyond.
So really, how thrilled were you as an institution when you heard there was going to be a one-page forgiveness form up to 150?
Super excited about that for the applicants first and foremost. But for those two that then had an application in, and then because there's some confusion saying, okay, well, wait a minute, now they have this much easier application. Do I need to go back and fill out this new application, or will the application you have still be good? And the answer is the application you have is still good. They are not requiring us to go back and make any changes as far as what's required. So unless you're hearing something different from your lender, that's the guidance that I understand and how I'm interpreting it.
Great. Okay, let's see if there's anything here. I'm sure you're not running into too many entities with ties to China that are ineligible for PPP second draw.
Not yet, not as of yet.
What are you seeing on ag businesses and production farming? Because I was unclear on rules for that, and I don't.
Honestly, Kelly, I am still in the same boat you are. I need to probably get additional guidance before I can feel super confident about what is going to help that industry the best that's coming through. There is a section that farming operations are, of course, eligible to apply for the PPP loan. And sometimes there's, confusion around the labor side of it, and when you have contract labor, et cetera. So more guidance, I think, would be better on that. I think that's where we have a clouded interpretation of the guidance and what's allowable. We talked about seasonality as well. The ag industry will have the ability to bring in their seasonality and far as like selecting which time period fits them the best based on their season. So I think, interpretation around that, we've worked with a couple of really great CPAs out there that are helping their ag related businesses work through the process as far as like their documentation goes. So I encourage that industry to work closely with their CPA in reviewing the guidance out there put out by Treasury. And we do need a little more guidance on that, even as lenders.
Well, before we move on to Q&A, or anything else you want to add? Anything else you're seeing that is notable in the early phases of PPP?
Kelly, I would have to say, I know businesses are needing these loans to be funded. I know that's weighing on a lot of applicants who have applied. I do want to just put some numbers out there for you and anybody who's listening out there. The new round was put out at $284 billion. We got some reports today, and this is public information. You can go out to the SBA.gov and look under the funding programs. And the SBA is now starting to post data out there. So it looks like so far of that 284 billion, 72 billion, they're reporting net dollars of 891,000 loans approved for the 2021 approval period. Now we'll be getting more information about that. What I'm trying to put out there, none of us have a crystal ball when those funds will be depleted. But for me, seeing at the pace the funds are getting approved, I just want to put a little bit of assurance out there, lightly, that funds are available. I think they're going to be available for several more weeks. But again, I don't have the crystal ball. I just wanted to put those numbers out there for everybody to ease some of the panic. Because even on our side, on the applicants who are applying with us, lenders are receiving a huge response. It's tough to be patient when you're really needing those funds. We are taking applications in the order, that we get them. So we're trying to balance getting those funds in the hands of borrowers, but just keep in mind that there's still good funds there. So hey, hold tight.
Yeah, so that's only about 25% of the total that has been allocated and spent
Right.
so far. And one of these days I might loan you my crystal ball.
I don't know. I don't know. Do we really want the crystal ball or not, right? We might be scared of what we see.
Yeah, been afraid to turn it on for a while.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just day by day some days, Kelly.
Thank our sponsors. And let's go to questions right now, of which, of course, they're going to want me to stop sharing like always. Okay, questions. Okay, so I'm going to read these questions, and I'm going to give you the first opportunity to answer them, and I'm sure I will have very little to add after that. So these have been coming in the whole hour, so some of them might be already questions that we answered, but we're going to still go through it. And our first question is, any updates on PPP and timing? It seems like everybody should have funds by now. Well, I think you just did a marvelous job of answering that, Deanna.
Yeah, I know that it does seem like lenders should be able to get the money in the hands right now. The one thing I didn't talk about, which I know people don't want to hear this, but it's just the facts that we're faced with. SBA is using a brand new platform. We used a brand new platform for forgiveness. The SBA origination for this round is through that brand new platform. The SBA also on their back end is refining every day to make sure that we're successful on getting approvals. So when it first started, we were seeing like 30% approvals on everything getting submitted, and that's improving every day. So they're getting feedback from the lenders submitting data. They're trying to make sure the validation of data is coming through correctly. So again, I know it's hard for people to be patient. We are dependent also upon, the lender system and the SBA system being able to work in sync and partnership so that we can get the money in your hands. So we do need the SBA to approve those funds back out as soon as they're approved. Like for us at our institution, we're using DocuSign, so that once we get an approval, electronic documents are going out to our borrowers to speed that process up. So I just ask for everybody's patience right now. When institutions are trying to stand up technology in a matter of days, it's usually unprecedented that does happen. So we always have expected a couple bumps along the road when we first roll it out. But know that all of your lenders out there are doing everything they can to smooth it out and really are having your best interest at heart and trying to get it to you as soon as possible.
You have to get your PPP forgiveness from the bank you got your loan from.
That is correct. You do have to go back to the lender that you originally had that loan. Technically, your first draw loan, whatever lender you had it at, is sitting with that lender. Even though it's backed by the SBA, you have to go to that lender because each lender only can see and control what's within their portfolio. So if you have any additional questions on that, you can reach out directly to the SBA. If you're concerned about maybe getting maybe your forgiveness application started, start with your lender first and foremost, but you can always escalate to the SBA if you're running into difficulty.
Okay. Is a new application for the EIDL loan required if one received one on the first round?
Boy, I guess on
I'll
the,
take that one for you.
yeah, go ahead, Kelly.
The EIDL loan, which I probably have a little more abuse with right now. So the EIDL loan is the same EIDL loan that was open last year, was extended into this year. So if you're talking, when we talk about EIDL, we talk about EIDL loan, EIDL advance, and then also EIDL grant, which is the new program. So when you talk about EIDL loan, if you received a $150,000 EIDL loan last year, then there's really nothing new to apply to. Now you can get reconsideration if, let's say, you received a $60,000 EIDL loan and you feel that you need more money, you can go through the reconsideration process and actually talk to the SBA disaster unit in Texas. And if they'll ask for some additional information, and if they warrant that, they will increase the size of your EIDL loan. Now, if you're talking about the EIDL advance that you received last year, to increase that from, say, $1,000 up to $10,000, that is going to be done by SBA directly. So our PPP has been forgiven. The question, can you take advantage of both the employer retention tax credit and the PPP being non-taxable and be able to make the expense deduction since the PPP was forgiven on employee count and actually paid? It seems like a double dip.
Mm-hmm. Kelly, I would rather refer them back to their CPA. I am not a CPA, and so I don't ever want to give bad advice. Of course, that's reliant upon somebody who's monitoring the tax laws, et cetera. So I'm going to defer to having them reach out to the CPA, or Kelly, even from your SBDC group. I don't know if you have any resources available to business owners that under the guidance of the SBDC that connect them to a professional in that area.
Well, I think we're going to just give the short answer today. I think that's a great advice, Deanna. But the short answer is most of these programs, you cannot use the same funds for more than one program. So I think that would be double dipping. But the other factor is, remember that we're waiting final guidance from the IRS. So I really think that for most of these, even though the program for the employer retention tax credit was going in 2020, really 2021 is where it's going to be most utilized up until June 30th when it expires. And so then I believe those would have to be funds that aren't utilized by any other stimulus program.
Mm-hmm.
But
makes sense.
But always consult your professional with these types of questions. If you receive the first round of EIDL, I think we just answered that. could you receive another round? So I think we touched that. So unless you're talking about PPP. So EIDL and PPP, remember the EIDL loan program was the direct loan program from SBA and the PPP was from a lender. So there's not an opening for the second round of EIDL except for those that received the advance and they received less than $10,000 and they meet those requirements that we talked about earlier. Okay. Will museums be considered a shuttered venue? Absolutely.
I would think so.
Absolutely. Under shuttered venues is cultural facilities, and I can't think of any better cultural facility than a museum. So yes, absolutely. And remember, with that shuttered venue grant, you can't get it in both the PPP second draw. So you can't have a PPP and a shuttered venue. You really need to analyze and see if you had a lot of payroll or if you had a lot of lost revenue and see which one would provide the greatest benefit for you. Second,
I was going to say real quick on that one, we are getting questions about that and they understand that they can't apply for two. We don't have any guidance yet. Obviously, when the SBA is going to release, the application process. So that maybe we can monitor that together. I know people have applied for PPP, but now they're seeing where the grant program may be to their better benefit. But their concern is, do they hold out? And, again, the crystal ball. Do you stick with the PPP because it's open now and they have the ability to get proof for funds? Or, that timing of, do you back off on that and then have the grant, apply for the grant? So it's really put, I think, the shuttered venues in a tough position in trying to make a good decision for the organization. So I don't have a right answer. That's really up to those organizations' boards, to make that decision. So I would just say, work with a lender based on the funds that we're still seeing available. I would almost recommend hold out a couple more weeks, see if we get guidance from SBA on when that's going to open up. I do see from the SBA's website, it seems like more and more information is coming out now about the grant, which leads me to believe it should be coming very soon. It's just that date has not been released yet. So I know that's not a good answer for people, but I would say just keep monitoring what's available and, see how long you can hold out for the grant program to open.
And Deanna, I think the shuttered grant program is going to probably be administered directly through SBA, or is it going to be through lenders?
My understanding, it will be directly through the SBA, similarly through the EIDL program is my understanding. It won't be through a lender. And that's the clarification we've been giving as well. People are thinking it's like a PPP, you go to your lender, but that's not my understanding. It looks like it's going to be directly with SBA.gov. There's great information starting to be delivered out there. I encourage all those venues to watch the site because that's where the most current information is going to be available.
Second PPP says 3 times for restaurants and hospitality industries. What is the definition of hospitality?
Boy, that's a good question. I would just say if you're looking at, you can go out and search the NAICS code and looking at industries within the beginning in the 72 industry should define a good array of hospitality where you're looking at, most importantly, you're looking at hotels, motels, potentially bed and breakfast. But I do not have the full definition, and we can maybe provide that resource out there, Kelly, so that people can see what type of businesses fall into that 72 category.
Yeah, and I think in either last week or the week before, and for our webinar that's on our YouTube channel, we did bring up the 72 NAICS code and went from the top, from the food businesses down to basically the lodging properties. And from what I recall of that, it gets pretty broad. It gets into, as you mentioned, B&Bs and other lodging properties. The one that's noticeably absent are Airbnbs. And
I see.
And I think it's going to depend on that, and this is just my guess, on how it is treated on your income tax return. If you use like a Schedule E,
Mhm.
and most Schedule E stuff in SBA does not gel, does not get along. It's
Not
oil and
surprised.
water. But if you have your Airbnb on a Schedule C and running it like a business and showing it as business income and paying self-employment tax
Mhm.
as that, then I think it is going to be viewed differently. So even RV parks was on that list, I noticed. So it's pretty broad. And if you even Googled the NACE codes and look under the ones that start with the 72, you'll find every one of them.
Mhm.
What are guidelines? What are the guidelines for forgiveness on the PPP second draw?
I think we still need to probably research a little bit about what forgiveness is going to look like. What we know right now is that they are forgivable, when you utilize the funds for the guidance that's put out there. So again, I would say go back to the guidance. You can review the application. Looking back out to SBA.gov, I would imagine it's going to be similar. However, we still have not, been released on what the total forgiveness is going to look like for this round. I know it will come out eventually, but I think right now everybody's focused on getting the program up and running for the third round and getting money in the hands that for the applicants that need it.
Yeah, and I think that I think there will be, it will be a different process from the first one. If you wanted my opinion, my guess, based on the program and the rules that are out, but just some of the rules that allow for example, the 150 and under, just kind of suggest that it's going to have a different process.
Yeah, it seems pretty vague, especially even on knowing that there's guidance out there that we're trying, at least what I looked from Treasury, that they're trying to reduce the requirements under 150, but yet it's still not super clear what that's going to be. Could it be just an application and then, applicants will retain their records, for the time period required out there, and then it's subject to SBA down the road? There's varying difference of opinion on what that's going to look like.
I received my first PPP and I want to apply again for the second draw. Am I only allowed to apply with my bank who I applied with originally?
No, they are not. You can choose to apply with whichever institution who's offering the program. One of the benefits, if you are utilizing the same lender you did on the first round, the documentation requirements may be less because your lender will already have your 2019 figures if your second request is based on the prior numbers you used. The guidance that was put out there is that applicants can use either their 2019 or 2020 figures. So there are some advantages from sticking with your current lender due to that fact, but it's not required that you stay with your first lender. That's up to the business owner.
Okay, trying to make sure I word this one correctly. It's regarding the PPP, and the question is they moved locations. They moved to a better locations in 2020, and the sales are better than in 19, but overall much lower when you compare the 2020 quarters. And I am having a problem figuring that out.
Yeah,
That is a problem.
I would say on the guidance that we're getting on the eligibility and our interpretation is that the business owner would have to compare light quarter to light quarter in any quarter that they saw revenue reduction, or they can use an annual comparison, a whole annual revenue 2019 to 2020, or for example, Q1 2020 to Q1 2019. That's really, I would say, on your record keeping and exploring your revenue and sales to compare all different periods. I would look at all of my quarters, see what happened based upon that move like that, and then also look at your annual revenue and see if that qualifies for eligibility.
And this is a different question. Started the business in November 19, received a PPP, used the funds. Business had zero gross receipts in 19 or 20, is the business eligible for PPP2?
That's an interesting question. I can tell you what I would recommend the applicant do is take a look at, okay, if you had no sales, but what were your expenses, right? It's going to come down to your record keeping of if you had employees, what were the expenses associated for those time periods. If you look at the sample application, we have one posted out on our website. You can also go to sba.gov. I recommend you look at your newer business start date. It gives very specific guidance as to what periods you can compare and how you're eligible. So without really looking at somebody's documentation, it would be difficult for me to give a really good answer to that. But I would say check your records. It's based on if you had employees, what expenses were incurred, even if you potentially had a loss year. I don't know, Kelly, if you have other guidance you'd like to give.
That one stumped me. That one got me. The only thing I could think of is that had payroll, but I would think that in moving from, since it is a salary reduction and you can't show 25% with 0 versus 0.
Correct.
I believe you got your first one because you had payroll and we were able to access
Right.
that. But my gut would say that without meeting the 25%, you don't qualify. But
Right.
again, that's such a unique situation. And the thing is that, and I know you know this, Deanna, that we see a lot of unique situations that get fixed.
We
Maybe
do.
certain problems, maybe the one I vented on earlier, they get fixed during guidance as it comes out, and they realize that there's an oversight for certain situations,
Right.
and they fix it on the fly. So we'll just have to wait and see. But the program's only going till officially right now till March 31st. So
Right.
so that's not a lot of time.
Yeah, I mean, and that's good information too, Kelly, because we did have instances like that where, we were able to escalate. Each lender has access to, lender hotline, emails that go directly to SBA. They collect those emails to see what type of lender feedback they're getting. And just like you described, sometimes there are situations where, they didn't think of certain things. So that's where you're saying the new guidance comes out and then it does get solved. So all lenders are trying to submit unique situations when they come up, and sometimes we do see good things happen out of that feedback.
Well, good. I have a question. I have one for you then. I received an EIDL loan a few months ago. Now I've been asked for proof of hazard and insurance, equipment insurance that I don't have. What will happen now? Will I be penalized?
Boy, that is a good question. So were they going through forgiveness, or they're just being asked for additional supporting documentation?
I'll take this one. It's an EIDL loan. So they received an EIDL loan and they need proof of insurance. And we have seen that where they've needed, because what has happened with EIDL is the SBA has came back and they've said, a lot of you entities that are corporations or other entities, you need to have a corporate resolution in order to borrow, which is consistent with all SBA lending. And in the rush to get the money out, they didn't seek those. So now they're going back and they're also asking for liability insurance in some instances. Now, will you be penalized? My guess would be no, because it wasn't a condition. I don't think that, and I don't have my loan agreement in front of me, you do, but I don't think anywhere in there it says that you are required to have hazard or equipment insurance. But I would go back and I would look at your document first and foremost. And if you don't see anything in there, send me an email and I'll try to get a better answer for you. But I don't think that you would be penalized after the fact.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement, Kelly. That's always good advice to give. Check your documentation that you signed. Have another set of eyes, take a look at it with you so that you understand the interpretation and see if there's any good that comes out of that, because your agreement should be what you stand on.
Does a restaurant qualify as a shuttered venue? I'll take this one. I think it's going to be in 95% or 99% of the cases, no. I think with this particular grant program, they tried to differentiate, somebody that had maybe a karaoke or maybe a singer come in and sing, to something that is really a true venue that has been shuttered, a musical, a theatrical production.
Right.
And it really requires some really, I mean, I think a restaurant could qualify, but in one of the requirements of shuttered venue is, do you sell tickets as far as
I
your
was just
income?
going to say that, do they have an admission to get in or something like that? Designating it as a facility you're visiting for that purpose, an admission ticket.
Yeah.
And on the
So
flip side, restaurants are getting the 3.5 times versus what they were in the first draw, the 2.5 times. So there is additional relief there.
excellent point. Is there an update on the third option, which is to increase your first PPP draw?
We have not had anybody request to have their first draw increased. SBA is definitely releasing additional guidance on that for the lenders. There's some webinars that the SBA is doing for lenders to understand what the process is going to be. So as of today, I still need more information about how to conduct that for anybody that is looking to increase their first draw. But lenders are starting to get information about how to process that with the requests that do come up.
If we got an EIDL loan for 150, is it all forgivable? It is non-forgivable. The EIDL is a loan. It is not a forgivable loan. And the EIDL through SBA, through the Small Business Administration, has great terms, and it's a great loan. 30 years, 3.75%. But the only part of it that is going to be forgivable is going to be if you received a PPP loan with your advance, your EIDL advance, then your EIDL advance would be. And I know it's confusing when we talk about the EIDL loan, the EIDL loan, and the EIDL advance, and now we have an EIDL grant. I understand it's very, very confusing. So the EIDL loan will need to be repaid, and it pays back over 30 years at 3.75%. Okay, I've almost got you done here. If you received a second PPP when requesting forgiveness, is it based on the 24-week covered period from the time you received the money like the first?
You know what? So if I understand the question correctly, it's on the second draw loan and PPP forgiveness. Will the covered period be 24 weeks like the last go round? Correct?
Correct.
I'm going to say yes, and more guidance is going to come out on that. I have not seen anything that's going to deter it differently. But again, SBA has been changing guidance along the way. So I can't imagine it's going to change other than that.
I think you are correct. I think you can take a 24-week covered period
Yes.
for either the new first rounders, because you got to remember also on the first round, if you're just getting the first draw right now,
Yes, it's up to
it
24
applies to the
weeks.
old rules.
Yes, it does.
I don't think we mentioned that. So, hey, well, look at that. We're out of questions. Deanna, you're fabulous. Absolutely fantastic. It's good to have somebody other than an SBDC hack sitting up here trying to answer all these questions at the end. And excellent job.
Sure. We do our best. Sometimes it's left to interpretation, and we're all learning together how to handle these programs. And it's taking all of us sometimes pulling our heads together to figure out the answers to some of these questions.
Well, that's a wrap then. We're only 18 minutes late this week.
All right, Kelly.
I didn't warn you about that. Deanna, thank you very much. And next week, we'll be back with number 48. Our special guest is going to be Celeste Young Ramos, who has the unique background of being both a restaurant and HR specialist. So really some great HR advice for restaurateurs, but also that it translates to other individuals as well. And we'll try to maybe have her on even longer than that later on down the road. So for Deanna, Blaise, I'm Kelly Bearden. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next Wednesday. So long, everybody.